The 2023 FCS playoffs are here and the bracket is in. I'm Stan Becton, NCAA Digital, here with my predictions for this year's playoff field. Let's get started in that first round. The three biggest first round games I see are Gardner-Webb at Mercer, North Carolina Central at Richmond, and Sacramento State at North Dakota. I like Mercer in that first matchup to pull that one out because they fought hard in that SoCon and Ty James figures to go off. I also like North Carolina Central to win on the road at Richmond because Davius Richard is a superstar and Mookie Collier is one of the hardest runners in the country. Sacramento State at North Dakota should be a close one, but if it's a close one, I like North Dakota, led by quarterback Tommy Schuster, to win that one. Schuster has shown me time and time again that when it's crunch time, he can win the game. Elsewhere in that first round, I like Youngstown State, Southern Illinois, North Dakota State, Austin Peay, and Delaware. In the second round, the biggest matchup that we're going to see is North Dakota State on the road visiting the 6th seed, Montana State. That game will get all the eyeballs when they play because those are two perennial FCS powers. When those two match up though, I like Montana State to win that game. Montana State has looked better than North Dakota State week in and week out this year. Even in their losses, they've looked better than North Dakota State has in their losses. I like that two-headed quarterback monster that Montana State has between Tommy Mellott and Sean Chambers, and I think that defense can shut down the North Dakota State running game. Another game in that bottom half of the bracket that you have to pay attention to is Austin Peay at Furman. Furman's dealing with some injuries entering the playoffs, but I think that bye week will allow them to bounce back, specifically quarterback Tyler Huff, and I think that will allow Furman to prevail. I do see one upset in that second round, going back to North Carolina Central when they play Albany. I think this one comes all down to matchups, and I think North Carolina Central matches up really well with Albany, and that will allow them to get that upset. The other teams I have advancing in that second round are South Dakota State, Villanova, Idaho, South Dakota, and Montana. Now let's get to the quarterfinals. In the top half of the bracket, South Dakota State matches up with Villanova, and North Carolina Central matches up with Idaho. I like the higher seeded teams to win both of those matchups. South Dakota State winning because it has been the most dominant team in the country this year, undefeated on the season, and I don't think it stops there. And Idaho winning because its team has been battle tested and it has the best quarterback wide receiver 1-2 punch in the nation in Giovanni McCoy and Hayden Hatton. In the bottom half of the quarterfinals, you'll see South Dakota versus Montana State and Furman versus Montana. I like South Dakota to beat Montana State because I like their secondary's ability to play one-on-one coverage and be able to have that extra defender in the box to stop Montana State's run game. Then I like Furman to upset Montana because Furman has Tyler Huff at quarterback and they will be able to make those plays that are needed in this old school defensive-minded battle. I don't think either team scores more than 4 touchdowns, but I still think Furman gets the win. Now it's time for the semifinals. In the semifinals, I have South Dakota State meeting Idaho at the top of the bracket. South Dakota State wins this game because I think they are the better all-around team than Idaho. You can look at every position: offensive line, defensive line, quarterback, running back. I just think South Dakota State's simply the better team, and I think playing at home, they'll be able to get the job done and make it back to the FCS championship game. In the second semifinal, I see South Dakota beating Furman. South Dakota has been more battle-tested in that Missouri Valley this year, and they haven't let one slip like you've seen of Furman do to Wofford. That said, I think Aiden Bowman has a breakout game in these semifinals and puts everyone on notice entering the FCS championship game. When we get to Frisco, I see a battle of the Mount Rushmore State. And in that battle, I see South Dakota State beating South Dakota to go back-to-back winning FCS titles. South Dakota State dominated South Dakota in the regular season. And while I don't think the margin will be as wide in a championship game, I think South Dakota State still wins that game, running the table, going undefeated.